The morning seemed normal. The sun passed through the lace curtain with an almost lazy delicacy, projecting golden patterns on the wooden floor. He made coffee as usual, 1 cup for her, 1 for him, even though he hadn't been home for months. It was a silent ritual, a way to keep his presence alive in that house, where time seemed to pass slower since he left. Her name was Elena. Her eyes were full of longing, but she was still beautiful. One of those beauties that time cannot erase. It only accentuates. That day, something inside her felt different. Although she couldn't name what, there was a tightness in the chest, a subtle noise between the seams of the soul. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, as if the morning itself didn't dare make too much noise. An instrumental song played on the bass on the radio. The kettle hissed on the stove. The small sounds filled the void with a soft melancholy. Every corner of the house seemed to contain memories of him. The boots, abandoned in the corner of the door, the scarf still on the hanger, an old letter on the dresser, reread so many times that the paper was frayed at the edges. He picked up the letter again. The fingers ran over the lines with the familiarity of someone who memorizes each word, each curve of calligraphy. In the letter, she talked about the cold, about the longing, about how his scent still seemed to cling to her clothes. Even on the other side of the continent, he promised to return. He promised that this war would not be the end. But I hadn't written for weeks. In the town they said that the postal lines were compromised, that the advance of the enemy made everything uncertain. But she knew it. Somewhere deep inside, he knew something had changed. It wasn't just the silence of the letters. There was silence within her, as if her heart knew something that her mind could not yet accept. The postman passed by that day. Elena watched from the window as he walked slowly down the dirt street, his heavy leather bag over his shoulder. He ran toward the porch, his heart racing. Maybe it was just another morning. Maybe the letter was there. But he just waved his hat and kept walking. No envelopes, wordless. Only the light wind, carrying dry leaves, as if he too had lost his way. She came back in, sat down at the table, and stared at the empty chair in front of her. A tear, solitary and timid, escaped and ran down her face without her trying to stop it. It was different from other times. That tear was not just from longing, but from a presentiment. The war had already taken a lot from that small town. Children, brothers, parents. The radio reported lost battles, broken lines, missing soldiers. But Elena didn't want to give in to fear. All those weeks he had held on to the knowledge that his love was strong enough to survive, that I would return, that there would be more letters, more leisurely afternoons together, more holding hands under the sky. But that morning, everything seemed suspended. Even the sound of the world seemed muffled. The creak of the wood under his feet, the creak of the door, the ticking of the old wall clock. Everything seemed to hold his breath. Outside, the sky was beginning to close. Grey clouds were approaching, like a silent warning. Elena went to the window and looked at the horizon. He thought about her face, in the smile, in the way he said your name like he was discovering it for the first time. He thought about the last time they hugged, in the last letter, and in everything that had not yet been said. He ran his fingers over his lips, as if touching a kiss that never came. He felt like something was about to happen, but he didn't know what. He only knew that this silence was not like the others. It was a silence that had a weight, a farewell hidden somewhere in time. And there, in front of the window, with her trembling hands holding the already cold cup, Elena felt that that day was not like the others, that his absence would earn a new name, one she wasn't ready to say out loud yet. It was just the beginning, the day she would never imagine who was about to receive the last letter, before the bombs, before the absences, before the silence of the letters. There was laughter. There was a light breeze passing through the golden fields, and two hearts met at just the right moment, or so it seemed. Elena's life was simple, but full of color. He worked in the small town library, where the sound of turning pages was as common as birdsong on spring mornings. And it was there, between the narrow aisles of shelves and the smell of old books, where she met him. His name was Viktor. He arrived in the city as part of a temporary military training detachment. He had eyes that seemed to take in the entire sky, and a smile that disarmed even the most surly librarians. But it wasn't the uniform that caught Elena's attention. It was the way he handled the books, how he read each page like someone listening to an old song, how he asked questions, how he looked into her eyes when she answered. The first contact was brief. He asked for a copy of Tolstoy. She complied, not knowing that this ordinary gesture would be the start of something extraordinary. In the following days, Viktor returned, always with another author, another title, another reason to see it. And, little by little, his respectful silence turned into conversation. And the conversation enchanted. They walked along the paths of the town after work. They talked about life, fears, dreams. He said he wanted to see the sea. He said that when the war was over, he would take Elena to see the waves up close. He spoke as if the world still had time to be good, as if the war were nothing more than a distant shadow. And she, despite her fear, believed, because at his side everything seemed possible. Their hands met for the first time on a cloudy afternoon, when a light rain caught them off guard on the way home. He pulled her by the waist, and they ran to the top of a tree, laughing like children. When they stopped, their eyes met. And there, between the sound of the rain on the leaves and the heat of being so close, the first kiss occurred. Elena had never felt so alive. The months that followed were the sweetest. She began to keep his notes between the pages of her books. He picked wildflowers and left them on her doorstep with little handwritten phrases. For your eyes, which are more beautiful than any spring. For your smile, which gives me peace even in times of war. It was a light but deep love, unhurried but full of promise. Until the call came. The war, always lurking, extended its claws. Viktor would be sent to the front. The town was filled with goodbyes. The trains transported young people with staring eyes and trembling hearts. Elena tried to hide her fear. I tried to be strong. She tried to believe his words. It'll be quick. I'll come back for you before the summer is over. At the station, on the day of departure, she was wearing a light blue dress. He carried a small suitcase and a sheaf of blank letters. I will write every day, he promised. And she believed. Because love has a habit of defying logic. It is based on faith, not certainty. The goodbye kiss was long, silent, wet with tears that neither of them tried to hide. The hands slowly let go, as if unwilling to admit that it was time. And then the train whistled. The goodbye, the emptiness that was left. In the following days, Elena lived between memory and waiting. The letters began to arrive, one, then another. On each envelope, he described landscapes, told excerpts from the training, told jokes to make her smile, and ended each text with the same phrase, "Think of me every night, because thinking about you is what keeps me going." She responded with equal dedication. He talked about the town, about the longing, about the time that passed slowly. She began to store each of her letters in a wooden box, lined with floral fabric. It was his treasure, his thread with the world, where Viktor still existed. In one of the letters he wrote, "If war changes me, let it be to make me appreciate even more everything I left you, because my home is not a house. It is the sound of your voice. It is the touch of your hand. It is your name whispered before sleeping, even without you hearing it." And so, between words and promises, they resisted. Each letter was proof that there was still hope, that the world could be cruel, but love was stronger. That, despite the noise of the weapons, there was still enough silence to hear the beating of two distant hearts. In those days, Elena had no idea that the weather could be so cruel, that a letter could be the last, that silence would return, because when everything was hope, the war had not yet been won. That day, the station was full. Men in freshly pressed uniforms rushed to say goodbye to grieving mothers, to fathers trying to appear strong, to wives holding back tears as if they could stop the train from leaving. The children waved without understanding exactly what they were missing. It was a cold morning, not in temperature, but in sensation, as if the weather had cooled only to accentuate the harshness of the farewell. Elena arrived early. She was wearing the light blue dress again, the one he praised so much. I wanted the last image I had of her to be beautiful, hopeful, like a good memory to carry on the cold nights of the war. Her hair tied up with a satin ribbon, her eyes red from crying hidden under a smile that she fought to maintain. Viktor was already there, along with the other soldiers. He looked at her, and the world seemed to slow down. The sounds of the station faded away. For a moment, it was just the two of them, as if everything around them was a stage, and they were the only ones real. He walked towards her with a firm step, but there was something in his eyes that betrayed fear, the same fear that she also tried to hide. "You are beautiful, my love," he said, touching her face with the palm of his hand. Elena grabbed her hand tightly. I wanted to say so many things, that I didn't know if I could be without him, that I was afraid I would never see him again, that she loved him more than she had been able to express in letters or hasty kisses. But all that came out was, "Right. Every day if you can. Go." He smiled, even though his eyes were teary. "And when you come back, we're going to finish that house in the country. You will have the library you dream of, and me, a place to see you reading every day." She nodded, unable to say anything else. The train whistled in the background, a long metallic sound that cut the air like a sentence. The soldiers began to board. Time, which before seemed stopped, began to flow again. Too fast. Viktor took both of her hands and placed his forehead against hers. They remained there for long seconds. They didn't kiss, they didn't speak. They simply breathed together, as if they were memorizing each other's scent, presence, and life. Then he released her hands slowly, as if he knew that if he didn't let go now, he never would again. Elena stood there, motionless, watching him get into the carriage. He turned one last time, waved and disappeared into the train. The sound of the locomotive rising, the steam spiraling upward, the whole world being dragged on iron rails. When the train started moving, she ran to the end of the platform. She called out his name and waved with both hands. Viktor appeared at the window, face out, waving to his smile was tight but present. And then, the train picked up speed, and the man she loved became a distant figure, a figure that disappeared. The sound of the iron wheels on the tracks echoed long after the train disappeared. Elena stood still, looking at the horizon. The dress fluttered in the wind. There are still no tears in the eyes. Only later, when he returned home, did he collapse. True pain is silent. You don't need an audience. She entered her room. The bed was made and the pillow still smelled familiar. He sat down and took off his shoes. On the table, a letter left by Viktor that morning. She hadn't seen him before she left. He opened it with trembling hands. "My love, by the time you read this, I'll be on my way. But I want you to know, every step of mine will be for you. Every decision, every hope, every breath. If something happens to me, don't let love die with absence. Save it, live it, spread it. You are my courage. With all my love, V." The letter seemed like an omen, as if he knew it, as if he felt that this match was not like the others. Elena hugged the paper to her chest. It was just the beginning of the wait. But the feeling of loss had already begun. In the following weeks, the town continued with its routine. Other women also lived with the absence of who they were. Viktor's letters began to arrive, just as he had promised. Long, full of details, some even with drawings. But the day of departure was forever marked in Elena's memory as a watershed, a dry cut between the time of hope and the time of resistance. I would never have imagined, at that moment, that the letter I had just read would be the last one written before dark. That kiss contained in the station would be the last touch without the weight of tragedy. That the next time he heard his name, it would be in the echo of news that would change everything. The letters became the blood that ran through Elena's veins. With each new envelope that arrived, the heart beat faster, as if for a few moments it came back. It was a sacred, almost magical connection that crossed borders, continents, trenches, and bombardments to keep two hearts united in the midst of chaos. The first arrived 3 days after departure. The postman, already accustomed to seeing her, waiting for him at the door, handed her the envelope with a look of silent respect. He knew how much that correspondence meant. Elena held the paper delicately, as if it were made of glass. He entered the house without opening it right there, as others did. He sat in his favorite chair by the window and took a deep breath before breaking the seal. "Helena, me, not even the train tracks could keep you from me. I still feel your presence as if you were here by my side, holding my hand. The journey was long, but my mind remained fixed on you the entire time. I thought about your smile, your smell, the way you squint when you laugh." The reading was interrupted by tears, but they were sweet tears of reunion. Viktor wrote as if distance did not exist, as if he were in another room of the house, talking to her. He described his roommates, the grueling training, the sights along the way. But, above all, it described longing and love, a love that did not diminish over time, but rather grew, as if absence were fertile ground for deeper roots. The letters began to arrive frequently, sometimes 2 in the same week. Other times, a larger space, which made Elena's heart sink. But they never stopped. Viktor kept his promise. In each envelope, a piece of it. Sometimes they came with dried flowers between the pages, other times with small drawings, portraits of her, trees, stars. One day he sent him a button from his uniform, saying that even the pieces were his. Elena began to live according to those letters. I read and reread each one dozens of times. He kept them all in a wooden box, with a rusty closure that belonged to his grandmother. Each envelope was carefully dated, catalogued, and scented with lavender to preserve time. It was his locket, your anchor, the only thing that kept him from sinking in his absence. Over time, she began reading the letters aloud to herself, as if his voice could be evoked within the walls of the house. Sometimes I read before going to sleep, others, when preparing coffee. Sometimes he would sit in the garden and read the sky, as if he could hear it from the other side. It was her way of keeping him close, of denying the distance. His words became a constant companion, more present than many people. The letters also helped numb the fear. When news of the war came on the radio, always cold and distant, she clung to his words. It was as if Viktor said, "I'm still here, I'm still yours." Even when the bombing intensified and the town went on alert, Elena found refuge in the letters, a parallel world where love was still possible. In one of the correspondences he wrote, "If this paper is the last thing you touch about me, let it carry more than ink. Let it carry my soul, my memory, my love. But no, I have no intention of leaving. I have the intention of returning, because promises made with a heart cannot be broken with bullets." Those words remained engraved in her. I repeated it like a mantra on the most difficult days, the mornings when the mail didn't arrive, the nights I dreamed about him and woke up with a wet pillow, on special dates, on birthdays, on silent Sundays. The world may be at war, but inside that box there was peace. And there were letters from him too. Elena not only received, he wrote with equal passion. He talked about the town, the news, the couples getting married, the neighbors leaving. He described cloudy and sunny days. She sent photos, hair ribbons, and even leaves from the garden. He tried, with his words, to be a refuge, being warm in the middle of the brutal winter of war. The correspondence between the two was a testament that even in the midst of inhumanity, there was still beauty. Those letters became a diary of two hearts in resistance. Each envelope was a refusal to be forgotten, proof that love, when it is true, is capable of resisting time, distance, and even the fear of death. Elena didn't know that she would soon open an envelope that would not bring her comfort, but despair. That a letter, like no other, would mark the end of that constant hope. But for now, while the mailman was still passing, while the papers were still arriving, she lived, and he loved it. On each line read every word written, because those letters, more than ink on paper, were the pulse of a love that refused to die. If this story has touched your heart so far, I need to ask you something very special. Leave a like right now and subscribe to the channel. It is thanks to your support that we can continue bringing stories as human, real, and deep as this one. Every click you make is like receiving a new letter and makes a difference. But be careful, what comes next is even more intense. The exchange of letters that kept love alive is about to be interrupted by a silence that no one expected. The next chapter brings a twist that will give you goosebumps. So take a deep breath and follow me, because this story is just beginning. The previous letter still rested on the table, with the corners bent and the lines worn from being reread so much. It was one of the most beautiful Viktor had ever written. He talked about a dream he had had, the two of them walking along the seashore, barefoot and with their faces free of fear. He said that, although he had never seen the ocean, that was how he imagined freedom, with her at his side, the wind blowing hope and no sound of war in the background. But that morning the postman did not appear. Elena looked out the window several times, gripping the fabric of her apron tightly in her hands. Time seemed to pass on. Purpose, with each crunch of gravel on the ground, his heart rose and fell, like a tide of anxiety. Nothing, no envelopes, no news, just the distant sound of branches swaying in the wind. She tried to convince herself that it was just a delay. The roads were dangerous, mail carriers were exposed, and deliveries did not always arrive on time. But the absence of the letter that day had a weight that could not be ignored. It was the first time that the silence seemed thicker than air, a silence that was not peace, but a prelude. The next day, the same emptiness, and the other one too. The following weeks brought with them a new kind of waiting, a restless and suffocating wait. Elena continued to leave a clean space at the table, always with a cup of tea next to her and a folded white handkerchief, the ritual of receiving. But nothing came. The postman, previously so constant, began to walk with his head down, avoiding the gaze of the town's women. It was as if everyone carried a burden that no one wanted to name. Time, once marked by letters, now dissolved. The days no longer had a beginning or an end. They were just variations of the same absence. Elena, previously made of hope, began to move towards a harder type of faith, that of not going crazy. He began to have difficulty sleeping. I dreamed of trenches. I woke up with his name on my lips. I had tried to write, even without answers. His letters were now full of questions. Are you okay? Did you get my last letter? Please tell me something. Each envelope was an appeal. A silent scream was launched into the void. But none of them returned. No one had a response. The box of letters, once a source of joy, began to feel heavy. I could no longer open it without feeling pain. He stopped rereading the last ones. I was afraid that the words that were once refuge would now become tombstones. As the days passed, rumors began to circulate through the town. There is talk of lost battles, of missing soldiers. The radio, now always on, was his only source of information, although generic. But one night, a particular broadcast left her cold. Major enemy advance in the Lotova region. The detachment sent weeks ago was considered missing after the last contact. Among the names mentioned by the military center are soldiers from the 17th Division, still without official confirmation. Viktor was part of the 17th. Elena felt like the world was spinning. The cup in his hand fell and shattered on the floor. The sound of porcelain breaking was like a snap of reality. He grabbed the edge of the table, trying to breathe. His name had not been said, but it was not necessary. She knew it. Silence, finally, was no longer just absence. It became an answer. That night, he searched each of his letters, like someone searching for a hidden map. I looked for clues, hidden messages, signs. Was there something he had missed? Any premonition? In one of the last letters, she found a phrase that worried her. If one day the time between us stretches too long, don't think I've given up. Just close your eyes and call me by my name. Wherever I am, I'll listen to you. She closed her eyes. Viktor, he whispered. Wait. But the only thing he heard was the wind coming through the half-open window. The days that followed were long. The women of the town began to talk about mourning. Some had already received official telegrams. Others, like her, still lived in a limbo of uncertainty. There was no body. There was no letter. There was no response. Only silence. And the silence was unbearable. But despite everything, Elena did not stop waiting. I knew that silence, sometimes, was just the pause before the answer. And maybe there was still a letter on the way. Latest, the one who would explain everything. The one he would have written in a hurry, with a trembling hand, with his heart racing against time. Because, even in the absence, he still couldn't accept that he had already said goodbye. She still didn't know. The last letter had already been sent, and it was about to arrive. It was late afternoon when the postman knocked on the door. The orange light of the setting sun invaded the room through the window, turning everything a melancholic gold. Elena didn't expect anything that day. He had already learned to contain hope, not so as not to feel it, but so as not to fall. She opened the door slowly, with her eyes downcast and her soul tired. When he looked up and saw the mailman standing in front of him, an envelope in his hand, the world stopped for a second. Just a second, but enough to make his heart race like it hadn't in a long time. He arrived, he said, without being able to complete the sentence. He had teary eyes. Elena didn't respond. He simply extended his hand. The postman placed the envelope carefully, as if delivering something sacred, and he left in silence. It was a different envelope, yellowish, dirty on the edges, with the seal broken, and a small dark stain in the lower corner. The lyrics were his, unequivocal, but she seemed shaky, off, as if written in haste, or with difficulty. Elena held the letter to her chest for a moment. He didn't cry, he didn't smile. I just felt it. Every beat of his heart seemed to beat inside the paper. He sat down in the living room chair, the one he usually used, and with trembling hands he broke the seal. As he opened the letter, The smell of wet earth and metal filled the air. Maybe it was just imagination, or maybe it was his presence. Helena, me, if this letter reaches you, then the world has not yet swallowed us whole. Maybe the time was too short. Maybe I'm writing too late. But there are things I can't help but say. She stopped. He took a deep breath. His eyes ran over each line hungrily, scared. The last few days have been hard. We are surrounded. The letters I send may never arrive, but I write anyway, because I still believe. I still believe in you, in us, and in everything we left for later. The words were dirty, literally. Some parts of the letter were stained with water, dirt, and perhaps blood. He had to make an effort to decipher some sentences. If I don't come back, Elena, I want you to know, my love for you was the only true comfort I had in this hell. The world may have tried to disfigure me, harden me, but your love kept me human. It was your voice, in thought, that kept me going when everything said I should give up. She began to cry. Silently, tears fell onto the paper, but she did not wipe them away. She wanted him to know, even if belatedly, that those words had reached him, that they weren't falling into nothingness. There was a night, 2 days ago, when I thought it would all end there. The sky was exploding above us, and the only thing I could think about was you, your laugh, your smell. The day I met you in that library, everything I promised to build by your side, and how much you deserved more than that. You deserved a happy story. Elena's voice came out between sobs. He pressed the envelope to his chest between readings, as if he could hug it, as if he could somehow avoid the inevitable. If there is a last image of me, I want it to be this, a man sitting among ruins, writing with trembling hands, with his face covered in dirt and tears, but with his heart full of love, for you, only for you. And if one day our paths cross again, anywhere, I will recognize you, and I will love you again. ALWAYSV. The paper slipped from his hands. She couldn't hold it. It fell to the ground softly, like an autumn leaf. Elena collapsed together, not as someone who gives in to despair, but as someone who needs to give the pain a chance to come out. The letter had arrived, latest, and with it, the confirmation of everything that silence had been shouting for weeks. She spent the night awake, sitting on the floor, with the letter next to her and a lit candle in front of the box where she kept all the others. One by one, he took the letters out of the box and spread them on the floor, like someone revisiting his entire life. It was a handwritten love story, a love that resisted distance, fear, war, and now he resisted death. At dawn he left the letter among the others, but first he wrote a small message on the back, in his firm handwriting. You arrived, late, but you arrived, and there is still time to feel. Then he closed the box and wrapped it with a red ribbon, faded by time. He placed it on the fireplace, not as a reliquary, but as a tomb, not of a man, but of a story that, even interrupted, would never be forgotten. What is said in a letter can be important, but what is not said, what escapes, what is implicit, sometimes has even greater weight. After a few sleepless nights, Elena returned to that letter, not only to reread, but to examine, like someone trying to decipher a hidden code in the midst of the pain of separation. He placed the sheet on the table, carefully stretched, around silence. The clock on the wall read exactly 3:17 in the morning. It was always at that moment when his heart beat the loudest, when his longing screamed the deepest. His eyes already knew every line, but that night he decided to look with different eyes, look for what he hadn't said, or what he had tried to say without success. He took a small magnifying glass that belonged to his father, silently cleaned it, and began to calmly go through the paper, line by line. Some words were blurred, others crossed out, but it was in the choice of phrases, in the sudden cuts and abrupt silences, that something new began to emerge. Maybe I'm writing too late. This phrase, which before seemed like just a melancholic observation, now sounded like a warning, as if he knew that letter could be his last, or worse yet, as if he knew he wouldn't have the chance to write anything else after that. But there was something more to the structure, the rhythm, paragraphs that started abruptly, sentences without periods, words repeated too much. There was urgency, despair, a noise between the lines. Elena noticed that some parts had been pressed harder, heavier ink marks, as if her hand was shaking as she wrote. In certain passages, the lyrics changed slightly, as if he had stopped and returned hours later, as if I were writing under a bombardment, or between leaks. And then, something caught his attention. When he looked closer, he noticed that on the side of the letter, in the space between the text and the edge of the page, there was an almost erased line, a kind of scribble, almost imperceptible to the naked eye. He brought the magnifying glass closer and read, "They are close. If I can't go out, I hid everything with Ivan." Elena's heart stopped for a second. Ivan. He remembered that name. One of Viktor's colleagues, mentioned several times in early letters. A young soldier with a calm face, who had been assigned as a radio operator for Viktor's company. After a while, the reports about Ivan stopped. She had thought it was just a coincidence. But now, that sentence, that single sentence hidden on the edge, once again opened doors that I didn't even know were there. Viktor had not only written a farewell, he had left a clue, a request, a message. Le oculte todo ai banan. But what? Were there other letters? A diary? Something he didn't have the time or courage to tell you directly. Something that couldn't be mailed but that he wanted her to know about. A secret, a confession, or a last attempt to preserve part of him. Elena stood up quickly. He opened the box of letters and looked through each one, looking for more mentions of Ivan, and he found it. In a letter dated 3 months before the last one, Viktor said Ivan has a notebook where he writes everything down. Sometimes I think he is more of a poet than a soldier. The other day he told me that if something happens to us, it is better that someone knows the truth. The truth that now resonated with a new meaning. Elena knew she needed to find Ivan, or at least find out what happened to him. The problem was that he had no contacts in the military, and the town was too small to store that kind of information. But, moved by the phrase hidden in that letter, she decided to try it. The next morning he went to the post office and asked to speak to old Sergei, an old family friend who now helped distribute the mail and sometimes had access to military reports. Hearing Viktor's name and Ivan's name, Sergei seemed to hesitate. He asked her to wait. Minutes later, he returned with a worn envelope in his hands. It wasn't a letter, it was a report, an official document. There was a list of missing soldiers from the 17th Division. Viktor was among them. But what paralyzed Elena was another name, further down the list. Ivan Volkov, killed in combat. Location, Lotova Forests. Estimated date, 2 days after Viktor's last letter. He left the post office in silence. The icy wind cut his skin like a razor, but he barely felt it. The only thing that resonated in his mind was that phrase, "Le oculte todo a Ivan." Maybe Viktor confided something to Ivan, something that never came to her, something that was still somewhere, buried, lost, forgotten, or waiting to be found. That night, sitting in front of the fireplace with the last letter in her lap, Elena did not cry. For the first time in weeks, her eyes didn't fill with tears. Instead, they were filled with a new flame, from a new search, with a purpose, because what was hidden between the lines was not just pain. It was a real seed, and she was ready to dig it up. The next few days were the longest of Elena's life, since he found that phrase hidden in the letter. "I hid everything with Ivan." Something inside her remained on alert, as if the heart does not know how to decide whether to cling to hope or prepare for the fall. She started asking questions. I walked around the town, asking about other relatives of soldiers from the 17th Division. I visited the post office daily. He spoke insistently with old Sergei. He searched records, newspaper clippings, anything that mentioned Lotova or military movements in the surrounding area. And as much as I was afraid, I wanted the truth, even if it hurts. It was a cloudy October morning when the news came. A stern-looking black military jeep parked in front of his house. 2 uniformed men got out. An older man, with marks on the face of someone who had already had to communicate many losses. The other, too young to be there, with his gaze lowered and his gloved hands trembling slightly. Elena knew immediately. He didn't need them to say a word. The uniform, the posture, the ceremonial silence. It was the morning of the state that arrived with cruel punctuality. He opened the door slowly, his face calm, but his fingers dug into the wooden frame, as if someone needed to hold on to keep from collapsing. The senior officer nodded subtly and took an envelope from his coat pocket. "Mrs. Elena Petrovna," she simply nodded. "It is with deep regret that we inform you that soldier Viktor Mikhailov was considered killed in action during operations in the Lotova forests. The estimated date of death is September 17th. The body was not recovered. The action took place in territory under enemy control. Those words, so formal, so carefully constructed, hit Elena like dull punches in the chest. She didn't cry. He didn't even scream. He simply received the envelope with both hands and pressed it to his chest. Inside was a printed telegram and a metal plate, dirty, scratched, and with his name almost erased. He led the men into the room and offered them water, but they refused it. They said goodbye as silently as they arrived, and when the car drove away, the world seemed smaller, colder, emptier. The whole town found out the news within a few hours. Some women came to visit her, others simply left flowers at the door. But Elena did not want to offer her condolences, not even hugs, no prayers. She wanted time. I wanted to understand. The official confirmation, although painful, put an end, although cruel, to the wait, but not for love, not even for questions, especially not because of the questions. He went back to the last letter, to the previous ones, to the passages where he mentions Ivan, to the suspicion that something had not yet been revealed. I felt that, even in the face of the news, a last thread was being pulled, as if Viktor's destiny hadn't ended there yet, as if his story or his truth was still incomplete. That night, Elena didn't sleep. He sat in front of the fireplace, with all the letters open around him. One by one, he reviewed details, hidden messages, phrases that now acquired new meanings. One in particular, written almost carelessly in an August letter, caught his attention. Ivan has been saving something important. I asked him to give it to you in case he couldn't. He knows where to look. These words, at that moment, seemed vague. Now they became a mission. The next day, Elena returned to the post office and begged Sergei to help her discover the whereabouts of Ivan's last known position. He hesitated. He said it was dangerous, that no one should go to an area where there was conflict. But she insisted. And then he said, there were rumors that, south of Lotova, a field infirmary had been improvised. Some wounded soldiers were left there. Others did not resist. Perhaps Ivan was among those who never returned. With this information, Elena wrote a letter, not for Viktor, but for those who had survived. He sent him to the military base responsible, begging that all of Ivan's belongings be recovered. A notebook, a backpack, anything. And he signed with a trembling hand, if there is anything I would like to keep for the love of my Viktor, please return it to me. Weeks passed. The pain was no longer new. He had become a constant companion. But one day, a new envelope arrived. This time, small, simple, without shields. Inside, a single sheet. We received your request. In a backpack found outside the improvised infirmary, there was a notebook with the initials VM, not yet identified. It is in possession of the War Archive and can be sent with authorization. She collapsed. The news of the death had arrived, but also a new hope, that he, Viktor, had left something else, something that had not yet been read, something that might explain the subtext, the urgency, the shaky words of the last letter. Maybe the real last message was waiting, and now Elena knew she needed to read it, because the story wasn't over yet. The envelope arrived in my hands, days later, small, discreet, stamped with the army shield, but without pomp. Just a red stamp with the words, Personal Effects, File 19A. Elena held it for long minutes before opening it. The weight of the invisible contents seemed to crush her. He knew that there, perhaps, were Viktor's last words, the most real, the ones he couldn't put in the previous letters. Inside the envelope was a notebook, worn leather cover, burnt edges. Part of the zipper still had traces of dried mud. In the lower corner, the initials VM, handwritten, shaky. It smelled like old paper, dirt and smoke. And as I remember, he took him to the living room and sat in front of the window. The afternoon light filtered softly through the curtains, casting dancing shadows across the pages. He opened it carefully. On the back cover, a note written by Ivan, in different handwriting. If this war takes me, and if Viktor doesn't come back either, give this to Elena. It's all here. Why she didn't have the time, why she didn't have the courage. She made me promise. Elena's trembling hand turned to the next page, and there were Viktor's words. Unlike the letters, less polished, more raw, uncensored words, written with the haste of someone who knows that time is running out. Elena, if you are reading this, it is because I couldn't go back, and Ivan kept his promise. Thanks for staying there. Although the world has tried to separate us from each other, knowing that you will receive these words gives me a little peace. There is something I couldn't tell you in a letter, something that has haunted me since that day. They ambushed us in the forest. Elena felt her blood run cold. Ambush. I've never talked about this before. It was a moonless night. We were on the move when the shooting started. We ran in different directions. I screamed Ivan's name. I screamed for help. I managed to hide among the trees, but they shot me in the shoulder. I lost a lot of blood. I thought I wouldn't get out of that. That's when I found the diary and started writing, although I didn't know if anyone would read it. The following pages mix report and confession. He spoke of fear, not of death, but of dying without telling certain truths. The last letter I sent didn't say everything. I lacked courage. I lacked time. But this is what you deserve to know. Elena had a ring. She stopped reading. A ring. He returned to the page. Continuous. I had an engagement ring with me. I had kept it since that day at the station. I was going to ask you to marry me as soon as I got back. But the war was faster than time. I never found the right time to say it. And then, I thought that if I wrote about it, it would bring bad luck. Shit, I know. But it was my way of protecting what hope was left. The tears began to fall without resistance. He wanted to marry her, and he never said it. Those words resonated with a bittersweet sound. Love and regret dancing to the same rhythm. Ivan knew it. He helped me hide the ring, along with this letter, when I realized we might not survive. He knew where to look. If he managed to give you away, it's because he too was brave until the end. The last part of the notebook was stained. Some words were almost illegible, but Ali deciphered. You were my home, my refuge, my reason. Even if this is my last word, I want this to remain. I loved you with everything I had in me, and although the war took me, it did not take what we built. Nothing requires that. Goodbye, my Elena, with all love, V. He closed the notebook with trembling hands and hugged it to his chest. That wasn't just a letter, it was a testament, an act of love, a piece of life that survived destruction. The truth had arrived, hard, but liberating. And then, as if driven by instinct, she returned to the envelope. He turned around. At the bottom, hidden between the folds, he found a small package wrapped in cotton cloth. It developed slowly. It was the ring, simple, delicate, with a discreet shine. Inside, hand-engraved, a single word, always. He put the ring to his lips. He cried like he hadn't cried in weeks. Not from pain, but from relief. Viktor had loved until the end. I had tried. He had left more than memories. He had left a promise. That night, Elena lit a candle, put the ring on her finger, and wrote in her diary. Now, yes, this was the last letter, but it was also the beginning of my peaceful morning, and my eternal love. There was something sacred about the small ring that Elena now wore on her finger. It had not been offered at a romantic dinner, nor accompanied by whispered words in the middle of a sunset, but his presence was so powerful that he seemed to carry Viktor's own spirit. It was the request that was never fulfilled, and, for that reason, perhaps it was the truest. She spent days reliving the moments he was by her side, trying to identify when he had thought about proposing to her. Every gesture, every phrase said at the station, in letters, on walks. Everything now acquired a new meaning. That ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was the materialization of a future they had dreamed of, but which the war prevented from coming to fruition. That morning, Elena walked to the field where they used to watch the sunset before the war. He grabbed Viktor's notebook and the package containing the ring before it was on his finger. He sat on the blanket, as they had done before, and opened the journal once more. I wanted to reread the words that now had a different weight. I carried the ring in my uniform pocket. It was with me through good days and bad. When I thought I couldn't handle it, I would hold it in my hand. It reminded me why I was there. Elena closed her eyes. She tried to imagine Viktor among the mud and the gunshots, holding the small ring between his fingers like an anchor, like an invisible thread that connected him to her. And if he had returned, what would it have been like? Would he have knelt? Had he laughed nervously, like he did when he felt insecure? Would you have cried? She wouldn't know. But now, alone in that field, in front of a clear sky, she decided to complete the gesture for him. He stood up. He took a deep breath. And then, with trembling hands, he took off the ring for a moment. He placed it in the palm of his left hand, closed his eyes and whispered, as if Viktor were there, "I accept." The words echoed in the silence of the morning like a silent vow, and when she put the ring back on her finger, something inside her settled. There were no more questions, just remembering, and love. She returned home with a peaceful heart, but still worried about one detail. There was an enigmatic phrase in Viktor's diary that never left his mind. I hid everything from Ivan, not just the ring, but our story, from beginning to end. This sentence bothered her because, despite the diary, there seemed to be something more, as if Viktor had trusted Ivan with more than words, maybe photos, maybe letters that were never sent. Perhaps the beginning of the construction of something that never had time to finish. Driven by this intuition, Elena returned to look for old Sergei, the only one with access to the objects of the missing soldiers. He asked him to check if there were any other items with the initials VM stored in files. He promised to try. 3 weeks later, Sergei returned with a small wooden box. Inside, some aged photographs. Viktor smiling next to Ivan, Viktor cleaning weapons, Viktor sitting in front of the fire, writing, and in one of them, Viktor holding a small envelope with the words for Elena. When I return written, I don't sing. The envelope was there, closed, intact. Elena felt the air escape from her lungs. This was like nothing I had ever received. It was not a letter from the war. It was a letter for after the war, for life after survival, to a future that never came. He opened it reverently. Inside, a brief and direct note, written in firm handwriting. If you're reading this, it's because I did it, or because you bought it for me. Anyway, I want to say, would you agree to share a life with me? Build the house with the library you always dreamed of. Have tea with me every morning. Let me grow old next to you. If so, wear that ring, and never doubt that even in death I would have chosen you. Daily V. Elena cried without fear, without shame. There was the order, the question that had never been asked out loud, but that now resonated louder than any scream. And his answer, already given hours before on the ground, now gained even more certainty. Yeah, she would have chosen him too. Daily, that letter, which Viktor intended to deliver personally, now became a bridge between the two worlds, a link between lived love and eternal love. And even without a wedding, without a veil, without a party, Elena knew it. The man she loved had proposed to her, and she had accepted, with the soul, with the pain, with everything that was left of her. There is a kind of pain that does not bleed, but silently devours, a pain that is not shouted, but carried in the shoulders, in the eyes, in the way of coming to exist. Elena, now with the ring on her finger and the last letter in her hands, felt that kind of pain. It was as if something inside her was suspended, a scream caught in her throat, a goodbye he could never say, looking into her eyes. The army had sent a telegram, laconic, impersonal. He announced Viktor's death, as if he were just another number in the endless count of victims. Missing in action, presumed dead, body not recovered. Hard and cold phrases that did not sit well with the man who wrote letters with dried flowers and talked about building a library for the love of his life. Without a body, there was no coffin. Without a coffin, there was no funeral, just a mass in memory of the fallen soldiers. The people gathered in the chapel, lighting candles, praying names that, one by one, were erased from the mouths of the people, but never from the hearts of the widows, the mothers, the sisters. Elena was among them, standing in the back row, hands clasped and ring visible. He listened to each sentence as if it were a fragmented farewell, but deep down he felt like he still couldn't let go. Because how can you bury someone you didn't see die? How can we cry over a grave that doesn't exist? How to accept absence without visible evidence of death? During the days following the ceremony, people came to his house with sweet words and eyes full of pity. They said things like, "He's in a better place," or "He lives in your memories now." Well-intentioned, but useless phrases, because what I wanted was not comfort, it was presence, and no one could give him that. The ring was now her mourning ring and her wedding ring. It was the only physical proof that she had been chosen, loved and dreamed of. She spent her days holding Viktor's notebook, like someone holding a newborn, with care and reverence. In it were his last thoughts, his last promises. But not even those words could end the feeling that something still lingered over time. I dreamed about him often, intense dreams, almost real. Sometimes I saw him walking along the town road, in uniform, with a tired smile, and others, he remained silent, sitting in front of the fireplace, simply looking at her. In these dreams, she tried to speak, but her voice did not come out. I tried to touch it, but my fingers went through the air, and then he disappeared, like smoke. It was always like this. as if even in dreams, Viktor was an escaping presence, never complete, never within reach. One of those nights, Elena woke up with an idea. She would have a symbolic funeral, a ritual just for her, an intimate moment to say everything you didn't have time to say. Not to bury him, that would be impossible, but to honor him, to finally speak the words that were stuck. The next morning, he went to the field where they used to walk. She took the box of letters, the diary, a white flower, a candle, and a small handkerchief with embroidered initials that he had given her before he left. He spread a blanket on the grass and, facing the clear sky, began to speak out loud. He told everything. He reread the first letter, then the last one. He said a prayer. He apologized for the words he never said. He was grateful for those who had the courage to write, even in the face of fear and death. And then, with steady hands, he lit the candle. "You left, but you stayed with me," he said, looking at the horizon. "I'm not going to erase your memory by trying to bury you, but today I let you continue, even without a body, even without a cross. Here you have an altar." In me he let the candle burn to that the last letter had arrived, and that, even without a perfect ending, his story was complete. Your way, a funeral without a body, after all, did not mean an absence of farewell. It meant that you had to say goodbye with your soul, and that Elena had finally managed to do. Time had passed, not like a light wind that carries away the pain, but like a river that flows around the stones without actually taking them away. The house remained the same. The garden was no longer blooming as strongly, but there was still lavender at the entrance. And Elena, now with grey hair and slower steps, continued to live there, between the walls where she loved, waited, and finally let herself go. She never married. She never loved another man, not due to lack of opportunity, but by choice, because there was enough love in Viktor to last a lifetime. She became the guardian of that story, of those letters, of that ring. She told her story to her nephews, her neighbors' children, and the young people who came to the library, which finally opened, years later, with the help of the community. It was his way of keeping alive the memory of those who did not return. But fate sometimes has one last ace up its sleeve. It was an ordinary autumn afternoon when Elena decided to open the old wooden chest in the attic. I was looking for a forgotten scarf, a winter piece that had been stored away for years. Among old fabrics and yellowed papers, he found a small bundle of envelopes held together by a faded string. His eyes widened. I didn't remember keeping it there. He sat down on the dusty floor and began examining each item. Most were drafts of letters she herself had written but never sent, vents on the darkest days, saved confessions. But there was something different between them. A small, unopened envelope with his name handwritten, in Viktor's handwriting. It was impossible. She would recognize those letters anywhere in the world. He was shaking, but he still had the strength of someone who had carried a lifetime of longing with dignity. He untied the string, took out the envelope, and stood there, holding it as if he were touching a ghost. There was no date, only its name. For Elena, it took him a few minutes to gather courage. The hands no longer had the firmness of youth, but the gesture was exact. He opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the sheet. The words were there, preserved, as if they had been written the day before. "Helena, me, today is my birthday, and all I wanted was to spend the day with you. Having you here, reading me, with that way that only you have of transforming any text into a melody. But I am here, far away, and you are there, waiting. I know I already sent a letter yesterday, but this is just to tell you simple things, without the weight of the world. You make me want to survive. You make me believe that love is stronger than war. You are my home." Elena stopped. The tears flowed, hot, salty, like they hadn't flowed in years. That letter, it wasn't goodbye, it was a portrait. A moment when he was still alive, still dreaming, still believing in something in return. Continue reading. Sometimes, I catch myself rehearsing what it will be like on the day I come back. I think about you standing in the doorway, in that blue dress. I think about holding you for so long that the whole world disappears. And I think about telling you, without the need for any ceremony, stay with me forever. Because no matter where we are, if we are together, it will always be the right place. He clutched the letter to his chest. This wasn't a new pain, it was a gift forgotten in time, hidden among old rags and forgotten memories. It was the answer to a question he carried in his heart, even without knowing it. Viktor loved her until the last ordinary moment, until the days before the fear was greater than everything, and I wanted to go back. He imagined a reunion. That letter had never been read. Maybe it got lost in the packages, or maybe Viktor sent it along with other correspondence and Elena, in her grief, didn't notice. The why no longer mattered. What mattered was the now. The belated reunion with a part of him that had not yet been touched. He came down from the attic with the letter in his hands, sat down in the living room chair, the same one where he read the letters decades before, and remained there, in silence, watching the afternoon light pass through the curtains. After a while, he grabbed paper and pencil, and, like in the old days, he began to write. Viktor, today I found your letter. You asked me to stay forever, and although life went on without you, I never left. You live here, in this house, in this body, in this ring, and now, in this moment. She smiled, although her eyes were teary, because he had discovered that true love lasts longer than time, and sometimes the last letter is not the one you receive. It is the one you find again when it seems that everything has already been said. Time passed, as always. The seasons passed in front of Elena's window with the same stubbornness of someone who does not ask permission to change. The trees in the garden lost their leaves and then bloomed again, as if nothing had happened. But inside her, something had changed forever. She didn't live in the past, but I didn't try to forget it either. On the contrary, he had learned to live there, living with nostalgia like someone who shares a house with someone who never returns, but never leaves. The ring was still on the finger, the letters in the chest by the fireplace. Viktor's diary, carefully placed on the shelf of the library he eventually opened, and called the Viktor Mikhailov room. Yes, she built the library, small, with large windows, the smell of new wood and carefully aligned shelves. There was no luxury, but there was soul. Every visitor who entered was, in some way, moved by that gentle silence, as if the words on the shelves were suspended in the air, waiting to be read, with the same love with which Viktor wrote his. In the center of the library there was an empty chair, in front of the window, a reading corner with a discreet sign, for those who are no longer here, but never stopped telling stories. The young people of the village passed by and finally asked who Viktor was, and she counted, not as someone who repeats a tragedy, but as someone who preserves a heritage. She talked about him with shining eyes. From your letters, of your courage, of his sensitivity in the midst of war. He talked about love, the kind of love that doesn't need a happy ending to be eternal. Over time, that story began to touch other lives. An inspired student decided to write a book based on the letters. A professor from the capital took the story to the university, and suddenly, that love that had begun between the pages of books and ended between the pages of a war began to reach people that Viktor had never met. There, love, unfinished, became inspiration. It became a seed. Elena knew that biologically she would not have children, but she didn't feel alone, because he had left something in the world that not even time could erase. A legacy that is not measured in blood, but in memory, in emotion, in words that spanned generations. One day, when his health was failing, he wrote one last letter. Not for Viktor, but for anyone who may one day find his story. If you are reading this, it is because our story has somehow reached you. It doesn't matter who you are. But I hope you understand the value of what we have in our hands when we have someone to love. I lost Viktor in the war, but he gave me more than many who lived together all their lives. He gave me true love, and that kind of love, when it happens, needs no continuation, because it never ends. It just changes shape. This letter remained inside Viktor's diary as a final period written in two hands. When Elena left, silently, on a cold morning, sitting in her favorite chair in the library, the entire town froze. Not as if we were in mourning, but in respectful silence. The library was closed one day, but reopened the next with a white flower on the reading table and a letter printed on the wall. She never imagined it would be the last letter, because, in reality, it wasn't. The last letter was the life Elena lived after her loss. It was every gesture of memory, every word shared. Every silence was filled with memory. The last letter was the love that did not end, but extended. Today, anyone who passes by the old wooden library at the end of the village still sees the empty chair. The ring now rests in a small glass dome with the inscription, "Always," and visitors, even the youngest ones, stop in front of the bookshelf where Viktor's diary is kept. Some cry, others smile, but everyone feels something, because there are stories that do not need to be complete to be eternal. There are letters that do not need to be delivered at the right time to change lives. Viktor and Elena's legacy is not in the words they wrote, but in the love that never needed an end. If this story touched your heart like it touched ours when we told it, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to believe that true love never dies. Your interaction helps this channel continue bringing stories that deserve to be remembered. And if you made it this far, comment below. Love doesn't need a full stop. Let's see how many hearts this lasts. Letter marked